Hi, today I'm going to be continuing on my women's prize list. Do I look very, very tired? I do, in fact, because it is a high chronic pain day, but I want to spend the day in bed with heat, drinking tea, and reading slash listening to audiobooks of the women's prize. So I'm really excited. I currently have on my docket Cursed Bread, Bandit Queens, and The Marriage Portrait. These are all books that I am excited to read, or at least interested to read. That is a good analysis of it. I have previously read 6 of the other ones, and I will leave the vlog ahead of that. I hope to read these ones before the 26th so that I can do a predictions thing. I think that that will put me at 9 books, which will make me feel like I have a good grasp at what is going on and all of those things, which is odd. I have not been the most successful in reading a large amount of books before, so I feel like having a lot of the books on the list that I've read feels crazy. Like, what kind of person am I? I think I'm going to start with Cursed Bread because I am nervous about it. If I hadn't heard any reviews about it, I do think that I would like it. However, the fact that it's talking about the kind of liminal, very sexual kind of book doesn't give me the highest thing that I'm going to love it. The official synopsis describes it as a small town in France that experiences this massive poisoning in bread. And that is not as much as the description as it is. And I know many people are disappointed by that because it reveals at the end that it's based on a real story that is still unsolved. I've heard the real stories about a woman who is unhappy in her marriage and is seeking love elsewhere. And it is very intimate and also very messy. And I can definitely like those stories. I've heard that the ways that it is done is kind of boring, but we'll see how it is. It is a short book. If I am not getting on with it, I will probably DNF it. The one that I'm most excited out of this cohort of books is The Bandit Queens. This one is also based on a real story, and it looks at a woman in India whose husband disappeared 5 years ago, and everyone thinks that she murdered him. So 5 years later, these women come around and are like, hey, you have to help me murder my husband. And she's like, oh, because of the fact that, she didn't murder her husband. She's glad he's gone, and she's glad people think she murdered him because it gives her protection from a lot of misogyny in the village and stuff. However, does she start wanting to murdering people? It is one of those books that feels like it's dealing with like domestic violence and stuff like that, but also has a really humorous cover, which always makes it interesting. The last one is The Marriage Portrait. I've been really excited to read Hamnet for many years, and I haven't. And I was originally thinking about reading Hamnet before I read this book, but I think I'm just going to forego it and listen to it on audiobook. I have been spoiled for the twists and turns from a review back in January, so I do know how this book is going to turn out, and I'm hoping that I like it. I do, in fact, have crazy hair, and that is because my friend was like, I really want to see your natural hair. And it's not even that curly right now, it's mostly just kind of floofy, which is what my hair is like. But I am almost done Cursed Bread. This has taken a really long time to finish, even though it's only 5.5 hours on audiobook, because I'm just not into it. Like, I don't know, I think this would go by above Trespasses, I think, because I don't dislike it. I don't know. It has some really interesting things, like if it was diving into this kind of fever dream, what is real, what isn't real, but it's not going to take a horror thing, I don't think. It is really, really obsessed with sex and desire, and like that, I don't know, that's not really something. Like, one of the thoughts that I had when reading this very literary novel, I put quotation marks, but like, you know what I mean, like, it's supposed to be like high art, and I'm just reminding the things where it's like, when they're like, every man thinks about sex every 5 seconds, and I've always been like, I just don't know why that thing is perpetuated throughout the world, because I just think that's overblown of like making all things about sex. But this is how I felt about this book. It's like, it is primarily female characters. However, it's like, it is every second is about sex. And like, very innocent things just become very sexual very quickly. And like, I don't think it's saying anything greatly about it. I expected it to be more explicit. And there isn't really any like sex scenes and any like graphicness, which makes me much more comfortable. However, it's just like this like kind of veneer constantly present. And I'm like, okay, cool, I guess. I have just a little bit left. My hair is just getting crazier. Okay. Book is getting better. I finished Cursed Bread and I was surprised. I liked it in the end. It was a solid 3-star, which is surprising. It's not a book that like totally came around and like I loved. I still had some issues with the writing style, like not issues and it was a bad style, it just wasn't my style. But in the end, I actually kind of liked it. If you stare at the cover, you can show the fact that it's just like the same like repeating image over and over again. And I feel like it shows all of these images that are just slightly out of sync. And that is this book. It is obsessed with storytelling, and we have so many stories told and retold, and they're told by different characters and they're revealed that they're fake or omitted or having information that is added in it and all of these things. And it's such an interesting way. And her fever kind of dreamy telling that Sophie Mackintosh does is something that I don't think works in every single thing. I think in elements when, you know, she's believing something's happening and then she's turning and she's like, is that a trick of smoke or did it happen? Is an interesting foreshadowing. But the kind of dreamy, hazy view over every single person, especially over Violet as character, is not one that I like. However, in the end, when we get to the poisoning, dang, is it good. Like, because of the fact that we know everyone's like half lucid and out of it and like all poisoned and in a fever dream, like it works really effectively in the end. And not only is it devastating, it also leads to these raising questions where you're not sure anything's true, what is true, what happened. And I did hear some people say that like they thought that they didn't understand why this book was told and like what it had to do with the poisoning and like who poisoned stuff. I feel like I understand that fully, or the parts that I don't understand are not meant to be understood. You're supposed to be questioned and kind of unnerved by the fact that you don't know. And I did feel very unnerved and very fascinated, and I liked that. Do I still love the book and would I recommend it wholly? No. I feel like it has some like Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier kind of feelings, which I love because it's one of my favorite books. This is definitely not Rebecca. Like, Rebecca is one of my favorites and this is not. But I feel like some of the best aspects of Rebecca are done here. They're just not, the whole book is not at a Rebecca scale, if that makes sense. It's like every aspect with kind of like self-depreciating main character, obsessed with people and how their relationships and all of those things. It feels like a more modern take on that story because that book came out in 1937. This one is set in 1951, but is written in the sensibilities of much more sexually explicit stuff that would not be written in the 1950s. However, this is just a really interesting book. I don't think it's a book that I would want to reread because I found the writing style almost saccharine. Like, it felt like it was sweetly like drowning me. And some lines were good though. One of the quotes that like stood out to me at the end was that the character's face was ringed like a dishcloth, and I was like, that's a great line. And there's lines of that I'm like, oh, so great. It's mostly the framing. I find things problematic all of the time when they really describe these people with this really like hazy kind of manic pixie girl kind of energy, and that is definitely what Violet is. And I feel that even though we had different understandings of her by the end, that is never fully pulled back, and I know that part of that is intentional. However, I feel like that aspect is like 2% unsatisfying. You know what I mean? Like, I understand why, but it's not the story I would have told. Like, or I would have told it slightly differently, I guess. So it's like a stylistic choice that I can understand why Mackintosh did it. It just doesn't completely satisfy me, but man, the writing is good. I'm really torn about this. It's definitely a 3-star, and I think that it will kind of go above Trespasses for me. So I finished Cursed Bride and I actually surprisingly really liked it, which is a surprise, and I filmed a review, so my thoughts are up there. And then I read The Marriage Portrait, which I was really, really compelled by. I read it pretty much in all one night. I stayed up way too late, and then I woke up in the morning and I listened to the rest of it because I just really, really enjoyed the writing. I really enjoyed the storytelling. I think the ways in which she conveyed being a young woman who's at first only 13 and then 15 and is like sold into marriage to a man who is 24. And I think that often when we like describe creepy relationships, we make the men really old, and we forget the fact that like a 24-year-old to a 13-year-old is very old. Like, I remember being that age and having men that age like making comments at me, and me thinking in my mind, because we're told that older men are things, and it's not like they're old, but it is still really creepy. And the older that I get, the more uncomfortable I get at the idea that I remember that men in their 20s would make comments at me as a 13 to like 16-year-old, which is like completely creepy and terrible. And we really see this in both her like objectification in her beauty and her feeling like she has to consent to marital things that she very clearly does not want to do and feels suffocated by it. And it's
really, really sad. And then we also have this beautiful descriptions of painting and the ways in which painting does. Like, I found that I like learned so much about painting and the ways that we paint and how different styles are made and like cool things underneath painting, and it's just a really interesting story. It's not like my favorite. It didn't like draw a lot of emotion from me. I don't know if that's because I'd already had the end spoiled for me, but there was moments where I did feel that like clench in my chest of like the pain that she was going through, but I don't think I ever felt like Lucretia was ever like fully realized to me as a character. We we don't have her really have relationships with other people, so we often draw over. And the ending, I think, sometimes it doesn't pay the greatest attention to the other characters that were in her world. So I think it's like a 3.75. Like, I really enjoy the story. I think it would be on my personal short list and stuff like that, but it's not like a favorite book. And I think that it is a book that possibly will fade with time, but I do think that I'll have fond memories of it. And then I have just started The Bandit Queens. I am not liking it as much as I hoped. I'm like really, really at the beginning, but it begins with like a lot of weight stigma and stuff like that, with an antagonist being like, I think like 8 times in the first like 10 minutes is like her weight is mentioned. Weight stigma to me is something that really, really bothers me as someone who's had an eating disorder for many, many years and is in recovery and has seen the ways in which eating disorders are like not recognized in people that are plus sized or anyone that is not, absurdly skinny. And even like I was incredibly underweight and still did not get treatment because I was not skinny enough. It's relating a lot to her size, to her dominance and stuff like that, and all of these things, and I'm just really not liking that. So I'm gonna try to get past it because I want to know the story. The story is also of a protagonist who's very apathetic, and she's talking a little bit about another woman coming to her and talking about abuse, and she has like some memories and being like, oh, it would be nice to like have a tea and like think about this, but like there's just so much apathy, and I really hope that she goes from that to someone who has stronger relationships, because a character who's very apathetic, especially apathetic to other people's sufferings, is just something that I don't appreciate. I do like the fact that it is putting abuse in the ways that it's not clear black and white. Like, she's talking about how his rage only came in the second year of marriage, and even through these things she has like good memories as well as hard memories, and you see that in both of them. You also see that in the marriage portrait, where Lucretia is really stuck between her husband, who is very, very kind to her and sometimes end there, and there's a lot of comparison between Janice, where there's this idea of the two-faced god that is sometimes very evil and sometimes very good. And I think that that is something that is really good representation of abuse. And both of them look at these stories where like you want to love someone or you want to believe in that side, and you almost separate the two ways in which the people is abusive because you don't want to look at the side. You want to see the side that loves you. And I think that that representation of abuse is really important, because so often we see abuse where it's like a character who just has like such hatred for their abuser, which is something that could be very true. But I do think that that sometimes erases a lot of people's stories and complexities of it and make it black and white, where often someone like leaving someone who's abusive and stuff like that is very hard, and can also be really complicated because you could have this moment where there's abuse, and then you can have them being like so kind to you and stuff like that, so you think that they're okay and you're like, oh, that was just a one-off and stuff. And I appreciate that we're seeing more of that representation and that is being talked about, because that's a really important aspect of abuse that's sometimes grazed over for the dramatics.
So I finished Bandit Queens, and for now, that concludes my reading of the Longlist. I still have Demon Copperhead and Fire Rush on loan, but they are not going to come in before the Longlist unless there's some kind of miracle or something. So I think that reading 9 out of 16 is pretty good. Like, last year I think I managed to read 2. So I'm very proud of myself. I find it kind of intimidating because things for like the Booker Prize where there's like 13, then I'd be like 4 books off. I'm still 7 books off, which makes me feel like I'm still have a long way. Like, I could end up with a short list that like does not include anything that I read. I don't think that's gonna happen, but it could happen. Bandit Queens actually surprised me in the end. I did like it a lot more. I kind of feel complexed and bewildered at the same time because there's aspects, as I mentioned, like the weight stigma and even some of the humor and stuff, the way that the women speak to each other, that I don't love. And yet I ugly cried at a moment of like female friendship near the end. And I think that the conversation around abuse was so well handled. And there's moments in which there's like levity or humor, and then a character has like symptoms of PTSD and just kind of unravels with memories. And I think that that shows that even when there's the humor and stuff around that, that it really actually does look at how that's kind of a coping mechanism rather than reality. And it's not trying to make light of the situation. And it also deals a little bit with how the women speak to each other, because near the end it talks about how women also wield aspects of patriarchy. And when, the society is so controlled by that, that's a way that women feel like they have to kind of stoop to the level or become part of the system of oppressors in order to actually succeed. So there is some conversation. I wish in some points it had been a little more poignant, or it had been like more dived into, but it is really, really well done, I think, in many spots. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's quite well done. I also think that the ending like does not resolve everything, but I feel like it's a common complaint about me in every area, just because of the fact that I really like well resolved books, and often that's not the vibe that they're going for. So I have to understand that that's a personal place thing. But I do think that Bandit Queens and Married Portrait are kind of quite tied. I felt very compelled by all of them, and like I really, really enjoyed. Like I read both of them in less than 24 hours and just felt really compelled. I had a wonderful day today. I went on a little adventure with my friend, and we stopped at a little bookstore that was a coffee shop. It was called Dog Eared. I want to say Dog Eared Musings because Monica's the best, but it was called Dog Eared Cafe, and it's just such a lovely place slash used bookstore. And I really wish that it wasn't like 40 minutes away, because I would go there every day. They had good drinks and good books, and like we didn't have time to like real stop, but I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of tied in the ways that I would consider Glory. First of all, I read Glory back in August, which was quite a while ago now. And also, I think because of the fact that I really didn't like that, but then the second half really came around for it. And that book is such a long book. So like it had such a time that even though I didn't enjoy the first part, I really enjoyed the second half. So I find it really hard to compare, even though I ranked it higher than this book, how it compares to these two books that I enjoyed throughout the whole way but was not completely satisfied. I feel like The Marriage Portrait, the biggest thing for me is that I didn't feel as emotionally connected, and I don't know how much that happens with the fact that I'd already heard negative reviews and heard the spoilers in that versus my actual relationship, because I actually did really, really like her writing. And then Bandit Queens I really liked, but the kind of women hating on each other and stuff like that, and sometimes being taken out of really serious moments by this kind of took me out. And I feel like Bandit Queens, I heard someone talk about how like it needed some more editing, and I do think that like with more editing or with like a couple more drafts, this book would have been like superb, which makes me really, really excited for what Shroff writes next, because I think that her next book is just going to be wonderful. Because like I don't mind the humor and stuff like that. Like I think that it can be really good. I think that in some places it doesn't work. There's a change of perspective near the ending to talk about a specific reveal, which I really liked that reveal. However, I thought that because we didn't see that reveal from the protagonist's point of view, that we actually got robbed of a really critical moment. And I was really upset that I understand why, like almost a mystery aspect, why they did it. However, I think that it seems too sudden of a change for it to not be seen. Like I needed to see that process. The Marriage Portrait and The Bandit Queens are just two books that really deal well with abuse and control, as does Curse Bride. These three books actually go really well in tandem together, and they all look at, quote, real events. Bandit Queens doesn't actually draw on the story of the Bandit Queen herself. Like, it's not a retelling of her story. It is drawing on her, and the characters in this take inspiration from her story and stuff, but also that she died young and stuff like that. And during Gita's point of view and her wrestling with the morality of murder and whether it's justified and stuff, she often looks to the Bandit Queen for that and for resilience and stuff. And it's a very interesting tale. Yeah, I'm not sure that any three of these books is going to stay with me as much in the long term. Like, they're books I think that I'm going to think about, but I'm not sure if they're going to dwell in my heart forever. And that's why I'm giving, 1 3 stars, 2 4 stars. But I think that they're more generous 4 stars because I think the craft is really good. But I feel like in my old system of more harsher review, they probably would not be 4 stars. So they're probably like 3.75 stars. I think my current rating would be Wandering Souls, Stoneblind, The Marriage Portrait, Bandit Queens, pretty much tied. Glory just shy below that. It's hard. The Glory really does have higher points for me in some points, but it also has much lower points. Cursed Bread, Trespasses, Dog of the North, and then Memphis, which was a DNF. So yeah, that is my current thoughts. I'm going to do a predictions thing going forward, And I think I might do mini reviews of each of them in a concise place as well. But if you want to touch on my longer thoughts, more rambly thoughts, there is another vlog where I go through all of that. And let me know what your thoughts are. Have you read this list? Do you have totally different takes? I want to hear them all. And yeah, feel free to subscribe and stay along for the journey. I never do self promo, but I should do it sometime.